Okay, so here we go with the second portion of our discussion on the skeletal system, two of three. There'll be a third one in a little while. Um, and this deals with the actual skeleton itself. Now, I promise you, I will not make you learn the names of all 206 bones of the skeleton. Um, but there are a couple of things that I do want you to be aware of. All right. First and foremost, I love teaching this lesson in the fall because it comes typically at the end of October, where Halloween is coming around, and there's all sorts of skeletons everywhere, and fake skeletons in the grocery store, on people's houses, and all that kind of stuff. But it's springtime, and skeletons aren't usually associated with Easter. So there are two portions of the skeleton that I want you to be aware of, and we'll talk about them each specifically. But whoops, nope, I'm really not good at this. But this portion in here is what we call the axial skeleton, and it's composed of the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage. Okay. And essentially it forms an axis through the body. That's why we call it the axial skeleton. The skull is composed of a number of different bones, as you can see. They are fused together, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But right now, let's look at the other section of the skeleton, all the way up here. This is what's called the appendicular skeleton, and this is essentially the major joints that attach to the axial skeleton and the long bones of the arms and the legs. Okay. Let's start with the axial skeleton. All right. The skull is composed of the cranium and the facial bones. Now, the cranium is this area in here, right? The big area that's essentially covering up your brain. Okay. Mostly protective in nature. And then you've got lots and lots and lots of little bones that make up your face. We call these the facial bones. And they each have individual names that you don't need to be aware of, but there are lots of them in there. Now, one interesting bone is the hyoid, which is found in your throat just above your Adam's apple if you're a male. And it's fascinating because it's not attached to any other bones in the body. You also have the vertebral column, which is composed of all of your vertebrae and the fibrocartilaginous discs that sit between each of those bones. And then finally, the rib cage and the sternum, your breastbone, right in the front. Now, let's talk about the skull. Okay, the cranium. Whoops. I don't know what's going on with this new mouse. The cranium is designed to protect the brain. It is composed of 8 different bones. Excuse me. You got the frontal, your forehead. You got 2 parietals, 2 temporals, the occipital in the back, and so on. And these are the bones that protect your cranium. The facial bones are mostly illustrated in this picture down here, and you can see lots of bones make up this this section. Okay, the hyoid bone is shown over here. You can see it just above the voice box, and it's fascinating because it's the only bone that's not attached to any other bone in the skeleton. Some of the facial bones that you want to be aware of are the my phone's ringing. But come on. There we go. Some of the facial bones that you want to be aware of are the mandible, which is your lower jaw, the maxilla, which is the upper jaw, essentially, and then the zygomatic bones. These are kind of cool in that if you do this little trick, if you put your hand just on your between your 2 jaws and clench your jaw, you can feel the temporal muscle there. But if you put your hands right on your cheekbone and do that, you can't feel anything. But then if you go to your temple and clench your jaw again, you can feel that bone again. The reason for that is that there's actually a hole right here between where the zygomatic and the temporal bones meet, and that forms your eye socket. You can kind of see it over here as well. Okay. The vertebral column. Okay. Your vertebrae, your vertebral column is composed of 33 different bones. The uppermost 7 here are the cervical vertebrae, and the very top one, and well, the first and second are called the atlas and the axis, and they give you the ability to nod your head and shake your head. All right. Only birds and mammals can do this. All right. Other animals do not have this ability. All right. Even though, like in Disney movies, you see frogs being able to nod and that kind of thing. In real life, a frog can't do that because it doesn't have those 2 bones articulated the way that they are. The next 12 are the thoracic vertebrae. These are the ones that outline your chest cavity, and they articulate with the ribs. The next 5 are the lumbar vertebrae in your lower back. And then you've got 5 vertebrae that are fused together to form your sacrum, and then 4 vertebrae down here that are fused together to form your tailbone. And so you've got 9 vertebrae that do not have vertebral discs between them, but all of the others, you can see this is a vertebral disc, an intervertebral disc here and here. And they are hard cartilage, fibrocartilage, that sit between those bones. I promise I don't have coronavirus. Anyway, I hope that none of you do either, for that matter. In any event, your rib cage is fascinating in that it articulates with the thoracic vertebrae here. There are 12 ribs in each person. The first 7 pairs are called the true ribs because they start at the back and they go all the way to the front. All right. The 3 bones of the sternum are shown here: the manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid process. All right. And so the first 7 sets are called true ribs. The next 4 are called false ribs. I'm sorry, the next 3 are called false ribs. 8, 9, and 10 are called false ribs because you can see the cartilage they articulate with. What is going on with this today?
It's 4 o'clock.
Thank you, Jesus. These ribs, I don't know why that is happening. I'm sorry about this. I'm trying to use a new computer and I'm obviously not doing well. I am sorry. In any event, these ribs are called false ribs because the cartilage that articulates them to the sternum is shared with rib number 7. You can see it here. Okay. And so 8, 9, and 10 are called false ribs. And the last 2 pair, 11 and 12, are floating ribs. These actually do not articulate with the sternum at all. And you can actually feel them just underneath the bottom of your rib cage. If you push on them, don't push too hard, please. You don't want to break them. But if you push on them, you can actually feel them move just a little bit. Now, everyone has 12 pairs of ribs. I have cousins who, I think I told you this story. I have cousins who are evangelicals, and they believe that men only have 11 sets of ribs because God took a rib out of Adam to make Eve. That is simply not true. Both male and female human beings all have 12 ribs under normal circumstances. All right. Now, the appendicular skeleton. This is composed of your pectoral girdle up here, which is your scapula or shoulder blade, and your clavicle or I'm losing the name of it. I having a brain fart, but that's okay. In any event, Then you end up with the humerus and the radius and ulna, which are the bones, the long bones of the arm. You've got then the carpals in the wrist, the metacarpals of the hand, and the phalanges of the fingers. Now, the pectoral girdle is kind of interesting because in human beings, it's shaped like or positioned like so, whereas in most other mammals, it's actually turned on its side. If you've ever watched a cat slink across the yard, all right, you can actually see the clavicles go up and down, come, push out, all right? But we can move our arms in multiple directions, right? And the reason we can do that is because of the positioning of our scapula. All right, the scapula has to be this way. Your cat cannot stretch out its arms in a cross. All right, your dog can't do that. Your hamster can't do that. Okay, only the great apes, humans, and other primates can do that. Now, the lower portion of the appendicular skeleton is composed of the pelvic girdle, which is composed of three bones: the ilium, the pubis, and the ischium. The ischium is the essentially the bone that you sit on. The ilium is your hip bones; you can feel them right in the front. And the pubis, well, you can imagine where that is, and we'll leave that alone. Then you've got the femur and the tibia and fibula, as well as the tarsals, which are the bones of the ankle, the metatarsals, which are the bones of the foot, and then the phalanges, which are the toes. One other interesting story is the patella, all right, your kneecap. Did you know that you don't have kneecaps until you're 2 or 3 years old? The kneecaps don't generally develop until after you learn to walk. And if you think about it, it's probably a good idea. Have you ever tried to walk on your hands and knees? All right, your kneecaps hurt, especially if you're walking on a hard floor. All right, little babies, however, zip across the room like it's going out of style. And the reason that they can do that is because they don't have patella yet. Okay, that is the end of show 2. I'm sorry that was such a disaster going back and forth. I will get better at this, I promise. It's just, it's all new to me as well as to you. All right, stay tuned for Skeletal System C, which is coming up shortly.